If you're in this video, I'd like to discuss a few different options for mainly body work, and as well as clarify why there is the need for so many questions. If you're That especially applies to you if you're interested in getting your car repaired or restored by me, and this will be probably mainly about starting off with body work, because 99% of the cars that come in here, um, they need some body work, and that just happens because they've been outside for 50, 60, 70 years, and so I thought I'd address that specifically. So I get lots of messages like, oh, how much would you charge for body work on my 1954 Bel Air? Well, it is a very vague question, but I guess it gets the conversation started. But what most people don't realize, that there is pretty much three different types of body work. And I guess because the automotive industry has changed the perspective, the way of operating things so much, that today, in the vast majority of cases, there is only one type of body work that people are aware of, and that's the traditional Bondo body filler stuff. And so basically, back then, there was no such thing as Bondo or fiberglass, right? And at the time that came out, it was considered to be garbage, and I still pretty much consider it to be garbage. So how were things done back then? Well, the first and best type of repair is through sheet steel alone, and that involves, let's say, this fender here, for example. Let's suppose we have a hole here. Actually, we did have a hole on this fender, but we're repairing that with 100% just using steel and welding alone. We use the English wheel. Basically, that's a tool that allows you to curve the steel in a certain weight and a certain degrees, literally like 30 degrees, 60 degrees, and basically you keep working on the steel, the sheet, until it perfectly matches the original. Right? There's no room for error. It's got to match it perfectly, so that there is absolutely no need for any body filler whatsoever. So that's why, I remember my grandfather he didn't have an English wheel, so you just do it by hammer, and basically you keep hammering on it until you got the shape that you wanted. That's basically it. Keep working on the piece of steel until it matches the shape that you need perfectly. So once that's put in, the welds have to be, like perfect as well. Because if they're done badly, then there's warpage and there are pinholes or just dips, and then you got to fix that. But basically, once that job is done, there's no body filler whatsoever. You just prime it and paint it. It's exactly, once that's finished, it's exactly as it was from the factory, right? But back then, I don't know. I think now I've heard that some factories are even gluing fenders and do some body filling work. But anyways, there's just 100% steel there. There's no body filler, no nothing. And why is that really beneficial? Because scratch a piece of steel, get a knife and scratch some steel, then get a knife and scratch some body filler. Obviously the steel is infinitely better many times better than the body filler, because the body filler is just basically filler. It's sort of like Play-Doh. It's cement basically on a car, and it is not. I use it because that's usually what people can, what people choose. But I really don't like that stuff. Now, with that in mind, if you just have some tiny, like 2 millimeter holes, sorry, not holes actually, like dips, just dents on the body of the car, then it's not a big deal applying a little bit of body filler. But the problem is when people just, hey, let's not weld it, let's just get a big giant can of that fiberglass stuff and put it on the car, and then it cracks, or it just scratches, comes off, and does all sorts of nasty things. It just hides. It just serves to hide. 99% of the cases, body filler just serves to hide a bad job. Because instead of actually welding it, people just, like a rust spot, they'll just put that stuff on it. Then obviously it doesn't last because it's got no adherence to rust. The rust just continues and it breaks off. And that's pretty much what we had with this car back here. Body filler on some places, and it just makes things a lot worse to fix it, because it's many times easier to fix a rusty fender than to fix a fiberglass fender. You gotta grind that stuff off, and it produces huge amounts of fumes. I'm sure if you want to see that, I show it on various videos. If you heat it, then it makes a lot of toxic fumes. Whereas if it's just rust, it can be easily cleaned and just welded on. You can't weld on body filler. That's the one of the main issues. You cannot weld on body fillers. The heat of the weld, it vaporizes that stuff, and it bubbles through the weld. It creates like a little volcano effect, and the weld doesn't penetrate at all. But like I said, once again, if the welding is done properly and everything is well cleaned and secured, then a little bit of body filler on a small dent or a seam is fine. Although usually when that is the case, I do prefer to just get some primer that's very thick, not yet diluted, and I like to use that instead, and just mix it into like a small paste. Use that as a filler instead, because the primer is much stronger than the body filler. I've done that on a small dent that I had on the Rambler. I might have showed it on the video, but not on the Rambler painting video. I'm almost 100% sure that I showed that on there. There was a small chip on the paint, so fairly large size, but very thin. Just like I said, a small chip on the paint. So it was only about, let's say, 0.5 millimeter thick, something like that, something very small, paper thin. And I just had some body filler. I had some primer. Pardon me. I had some primer. That was, if you don't mix that stuff and you don't dilute it, then it sort of becomes pasty. And I just got some of that paste, put it on. That's much better repair. Well, most people won't tell you that, but anyway, so once again, that's the just showing you the two extremes: the best, the worst, and the in between, which is still pretty decent. And there's obviously variations. The point is, the more body filler you use, the more likely it is to crack and to get scratched and to peel off. So as always, I try to use as less body filler as possible. the minimum amount as possible. Like if I can get away, most, lots of times, especially in flat parts, I can get away with not using it at all. So just the point is steel is much stronger than body filler. That's Just keep that in mind. And if you're sort of wondering what sort of you already had some work done on your car, or somebody else, or you're buying a car from somebody else that's done work on it, one way you can test to find out how much body filler was used on it is to use a very famous, now kind of forgotten method, which is the magnet method. Very simple, brilliant. It's been used for centuries. And you just get a magnet and you place it, you move it around, and the magnet will be attracted to the steel. And if there's a lot of body filler, then it won't be attracted, so you know that in those sections there is a bunch of body filler. So that's the way you can identify them, because right away, right after you put it, and people then do a very nice body sculpting, that's what I call it, and then to the point where you can't see it. They already have paint on it, but then you get a nasty surprise, next winter when the temperature goes, to below freezing, and that thing cracks, and then you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting it. So that's how you can figure out that in advance and avoid unnecessary surprises. So with that in mind, I think I can move on to the second type of fender repair, car body repair, body work, which is soldering, or brazing, or tinning. It's the same sort of term, three terms used for the same thing. And that is pretty much in between the steel and the body filler in terms of quality. And back then they used to use lead. So lead is not as hard as steel. But it's much better. It's harder than the body filler. So it's, in terms of quality, it's somewhere in between. It's just right in between there. And nowadays you can no longer use lead, so you use a tinning and other liquid metal, soft metal products. I bet you could even use aluminum. But basically it's just like electrical work, like soldering. Soldering is not welding, because the metals, they don't actually mix. That's why welding is the best of all the jobs. The metals actually mix together. They melt and they mix together, so that when that thing cools, it's just one thing. Soldering is not, it's almost like a glue sort of thing. It's not glue, but it's not welding. It's you have to do your own research to figure the specifics about that. But basically, you're putting molten metal on the car. So, and that's sort of the what the repair shop used to do back then, more towards the 70s. If people didn't want to spend the money and time for doing the all steel repair, because obviously that takes quite a bit of time. You got to, especially on curved parts and corners, you got to keep forming the metal by hand, and that does take a lot of time. So if you didn't want to spend that much money, that's what you do. You get them to solder it for you. It's just like the electronics. You put a flux paste on the car and you heat it up with a giant torch, and you melt that tin, whatever, and then you sort of form it, and you sand it, and it's basically a body filler, almost a metal body filler. So there you have it. The bad thing about it is that, once again, you cannot weld on it after that's done. I think I can't remember if it was a repair on the DeSoto. Sorry, I know it was a repair on the DeSoto. I just don't remember if I've shown it on a video, but there was some of that molten metal body filler sort of stuff on one of the fenders, and same problem. If you try to weld on it, then it just bubbles through, or it just melts away and spatters back at you, or releases gases. And so before welding, once again, if you ever have to weld it, you have to remove it first. So that's another advantage of the all steel repair. Once it's done, if you ever have rust on it or whatever, it's much more durable and much easier to repair. The other two types, with the tinning or the regular Bondo stuff, then you have to remove it before you're able to weld it. So there you have it. So just in summary, worst possible scenario, and obviously you have sort of combinations of those two. You know, at some places you'll actually have, like, let's say you get a car from the 40s. You know, the first guy back in 1947, some kid going to school hit the car with his bicycle, and there was a dent. The guy took it to the body shop. They melted some lead, poured it on, and then, you know, whatever happened to the car, 70 years later, the car is sort of starting to rust, and somebody then put some body filler on. So you have combinations of those two. The combination, most effective combination, and that's the one that I usually use, and I've used most of the time, is a bit of a combination of the best and the worst. So what I'll do is I'll form the sheet steel as best as I can, and then I'm just using a hammer most of the times, or I can use the English wheel as well. But most of the times, you know, hammer is very practical, very easy, very fast, especially if you end up becoming pretty good at it. So that's pretty fast. The downside of using the hammer is that you're left with lots of little dents. So then I just use the body filler to fill in those small dents or welding seams, and that's usually just under 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters. And you know, if that ever gets damaged or scratched, you can only scratch it, you can't crack it. So if that ever gets scratched, the client comes back, we fix it, or you know, depending what was agreed on. But that's the most cost-effective and high-quality combination that you can get. So once again, that's the most that's sort of the best solution in terms of cost and quality. If you have to go through, you know, 100% steel, which is the best quality, then the cost goes way up. With using the steel, you know, the method that I just explained, I'm able to do the job pretty quickly, and it doesn't cost too much, because to be honest, the welding and sheet steel is cheaper in terms of materials. It's cheaper than the body filler. Body filler is now running at about $30 a can, and welding, it's running at about $100 for a 4x8 sheet you can use pretty much for an entire car. So and then you have obviously the welding wire, which is once again, you probably use a whole spool. I think I used 2 spools, big 11-pound spools for the DeSoto. There was a lot of welding. Entire fenders had to be done. So that is the best option in terms of cost and quality. So there you have it. If you want to look at it, I've done that on all the body work so far on the cars that I have videos on the channel. So feel free to check that out. So I guess that just serves to help you understand what I need to understand when working out a quote for you for the body work. So that's why there's quite a few questions involved. I'll ask you what sort of body work you need, and like the other thing that's involved is, has somebody done work to it before? Because like I said, there's just a big hole here. And there's just steel around, and I can just put a new piece of steel in, weld it in, put some body filler, and we're good to go. But if somebody actually put a bunch of body filler on it, and then the other side is full of, you know, like oil undercoating, then, you know, the job does become quite a bit more difficult. So I need to know all of that before I can give you a price in advance. So that's why there's lots of questions involved, and you know, some people will also like to have, especially for parts like inner fenders and parts that are like underneath the car that are prone to rust. You can also use stainless steel sheet and stainless steel wire for the welding, so stainless steel welds. And once again, that's an even better repair than any of the ones that I mentioned. But obviously, stainless steel, the material itself, is about 3 to 5 times more expensive than regular steel. So once again, it adds up the cost, and generally you get what you pay for. So you know, it all depends how much money you're willing to spend, and that's why I like to tell you that I cannot most of the times work with a budget. So if you are in a budget, if your project is, you know, direction of your project is determined by the cost, as to like through your budget, then I'm sure that most of the cases you can work something out. If you've got lots of money to spare, then you probably just want to go with the best quality. So that's why, once again, I sort of need to understand that to help you come to a decision, and I know what's best, and work with you to make your project, you know, turn your project into a reality. And at the end of the day, you want to be happy as well, right? So the other thing that I should mention is that there are also different types of body fillers. So there's a lightweight, there's a heavy duty, and there's a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 body filler. So basically, the large area body filler, it's very fibrous. There's lots of fibers in it, and it's usually green stuff, and it's very hard to spread. And no matter how you spread it, you don't get a smooth finish. And that I think people use that on boats as well. That's just so that usually serves for when people have like large areas that they gotta cover. I unfortunately had to use that on the 66 Thunderbird that I'm working on, because the panel already had so much body filler on it from whoever had it before, and it wasn't worthwhile to just try to replace the whole fender and go through all that trouble and remove all the body filler. So we just sort of had to continue. I couldn't leave it with just the welds, which is what I normally do, because of the height difference. There was about 4 to 5 millimeters thickness of body filler. So but that green stuff, it is reasonably durable. It is the standard out there. It's better than the standard out there. So, you know, provided nobody crashes on it or scratches it like really heavily, you'll be all right. I use, but once again, you don't want, like I said, I always try to stay away from that stuff. But it is harder than the lightweight body filler. So what happens is, if in the event that does, you know, occur, that you need that body filler, that somebody does do that body filler stuff, you go through the heavyweight stuff, that are very fibrous green stuff for large areas, and then you put the lightweight body filler to to get a smooth finish and fill in the holes. Ideally, if you are going to need that much body filler, you do it with just the heavyweight body filler. It does involve a lot more sanding, and you even need to use like the grinder with the very abrasive wheel on it, maybe even like a 40 grit, but at least you get a much harder finish. The lightweight body filler, it gets a smooth finish that you don't have to spend so much time sanding, but it is softer. So then you also have like Kevlar body fillers, Kevlar reinforced body fillers. I've actually never had the opportunity to use one of those, but they run at about $50 a can, and they should be, it's Kevlar, it's bulletproof, what bulletproof vests are made of, so it should be, pretty good stuff. But once again, I doubt that it will beat the good old steel, because at any ways, it's not 100. That stuff isn't 100% Kevlar. It's Kevlar reinforced, so it's still not going to be as good as the steel repair at any rate. So, and there are the other type of body filler that you have is the you have like a metal reinforced body filler as well. I've seen that. I think the brand, the most common one, at least around here, is the Bondo Gold. I think that's what it's called. And then you also have like resin and patch stuff, and that stuff is the worst of the worst, right? So if you do have the money and you want to use body filler, you don't have access to a welder, or at that point when you start looking at the reinforced body fillers, like either the Kevlar reinforced or the steel. Actually, I don't think it's steel, the metal. It says metal reinforced. Said I haven't used it, so I'm not 100% sure. But in all likelihood, it should be better than the other ones, right? Because it's got Kevlar and it's got some sort of metal in it. So 100% certain it should be better than the other ones. But I've actually never used it. But at the time, once you start using that stuff, the job has most likely become more expensive than if you were to just get it welded. So it's sort of counterintuitive. You're paying more for less quality, and so generally, like I said, it's best to just go with the welding steel products. I get people telling me, nowadays, we have very high powerful glue. Well, the day that somebody welds an axle, the day that somebody glues an axle, or glues a wheel, or glues a tire, or something like that, gets into the car, puts his mother in it, and drives it on the highway, then I'll believe glue. Otherwise, glue for me here, it's a no-no. It's considered garbage. I've never actually used any sort of glue to glue anything. I do use like the adhesives, rubber adhesives for like closing the seams. I use it on the Rambler for the seams. And that stuff is pretty good for non-structural parts. Right, when people start getting into glue, like all the experiences I've had with like glue, it's turned out badly. And so yeah, that's sort of what I think about glue. And, oh yeah, and the other thing I was gonna talk about is the on there. If you go to the auto shop and you go to the body filler section, the other thing that you'll have is like a fiberglass sheet and a resin, and that is absolutely the worst stuff on the planet. It's supposed to be like a repair for use on boats. I've seen a movie once where they got a crack on the side of the boat. They try to use that stuff, and I don't think it really worked. It might work temporarily, but on cars, at a shop, the only use for it is for cheats. No decent person, no reasonable